The United States Constitution is a relatively short document consisting of just 7 articles. The founders did their best to anticipate different situations that might arise as they put the Constitution together, but they provided a way to modify it if changes were needed in the future. That process, the amendment process, is outlined in the 5th article. There are 2 phases to the amendment process: proposing and ratifying. For proposing, there are 2 entities that can offer amendments to the Constitution. The first is the United States Congress. To propose an amendment, both chambers must achieve 2/3 vote on the proposal. This is the method of proposal that has been used for every amendment that has been made to the Constitution. But the other entity that can propose amendments is a convention of states. So what is a convention of states? Well, it is essentially a gathering of leaders from each state in one place to discuss and perhaps propose constitutional changes. It is meant as an alternative to Congress itself in case Congress is being problematic, perhaps. Since the Constitution went into effect, this second method of proposing amendments, an amendments convention, has never occurred. But if it were, it would take 2/3 of states at the convention to propose an amendment, just as it requires 2/3 of Congress in the first method. So in either case, whether through Congress or convention of states, the threshold for proposing is 2/3 of states. But once an amendment is proposed, it must be ratified. Just as there are 2 ways to propose, there are also 2 ways to ratify. The first way is to have the legislatures of 3/4 of the states agree to the amendment. The alternative is to have conventions within each state form to consider ratification of the amendment. Now, this is not to be confused with the aforementioned convention of states method to propose. That is one single convention where all states gather together in one place. The state convention's approach to ratify means there will be a convention within each state individually. In other words, 50 conventions for the 50 states. The state convention's approach to ratifying would also require 3/4 of states to agree. So with either method, the ratification threshold is the same, 3/4. While all 27 amendments were proposed via Congress, 26 of 27 were ratified by state legislatures. The one that was used in the state convention's method was the amendment repealing prohibition. The Congress probably chose the convention's approach to ratify the proposal because they believed that they would be more likely to repeal prohibition than would the state legislatures. So to review, it takes a 2/3 vote of Congress or a convention of states to propose an amendment. And it takes a 3/4 vote of state legislatures or state conventions to ratify the proposed amendment. So this raises the question, why have we not seen a convention of states gather to propose amendments in the last 200 plus years? Well, there are a variety of reasons, but one principal reason has to do with the fear of what's often referred to as a runaway convention. What is a runaway convention? Well, it has to do with an interpretation of what was or was not supposed to occur at the original Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. Some believe that the convention was supposed to merely amend the existing governing document of the day called the Articles of Confederation, not replace them altogether, even if it was with the Constitution. Those folks believe that the Philadelphia Convention was essentially a runaway convention in that it did much more than it was ever intended. Many have a similar fear that a convention today could essentially rewrite the Constitution just as the Philadelphia Convention rewrote the Articles of Confederation over 200 years ago. They doubt that such a convention could be limited to just one or a few amendments, thus meaning the entire Constitution could be vulnerable to significant changes, and that scares them. Others, on the other hand, believe that the circumstances of today are vastly different than those of 200 plus years ago, and that the founders did intend to replace the Articles when they gathered originally. They also contend that it is possible to place limits on such a convention so that it cannot just scrap the Constitution in favor of whatever it thinks is better. Recent budgetary issues and the rising national debt has seen a movement of people supporting this idea of calling an Article 5 Amendments Convention for purposes of proposing a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution, since they believe the Congress wouldn't have the political will to make such a major proposal. Whether or not this would be a good idea is a matter of debate. but only time will tell if the states ever avail themselves of this Article 5 amendments approach and, should such a convention be called, what the result would be.